Hey, I'm Stephen Scott from Big Mouth Audio. Welcome to the Creative Leaders Podcast. Okay, Sam, welcome to the Creative Leaders Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, kind of well. Got a bit of a sore throat, but other than that, I'm firing okay.
Good. We're just going to dive straight into it as we always do. And I'm going to ask you to, in your own words, kind of tell us a little bit about why you do what you do. What's the kind of background? What's your origin story that leads you up to the position that you're in today?
Well, I think probably like a few other people around my age, my path into games is quite convoluted. I came into games fairly late. I was in my early 30s when I got into the games industry proper. So I started off, let's see. So after being a very bad student that didn't achieve very much educationally, I then went on to do some labouring, and I then did quite a bit of just practice artwork. Art was my strong point. Especially loved comics, and the late 80s and early 90s was a great time to love comics because we had a lot of fantastic titles coming out. So when Dark Knight and Elektra and all those greats were coming out. So I loved my comic books. But the 80s in the north of England and early 90s north of England wasn't a great time to try and find work. So I spent a fair bit of time unemployed, and then I did some work with my dad, oddly enough, who worked in management consultancy and he did negotiation and strategic alliancing training, which is an odd thing for me to have played any part in, but there's a part of that called behavior analysis. And that is monitoring the behaviors in a negotiation or a meeting and then giving feedback on it. And it paints a picture of what's happening in that meeting. It paints a picture of the culture and gives you a tool set to help change and identify what you're doing. It turned out I was quite good at that. So I did that for quite a while I carried on doing my comic book stuff. And that kind of continued until the mid-90s when I set up a little comic book studio with a couple of my friends in Sheffield in an office called The Workstation. And we made indie comics slowly. and let's say we learned a few lessons. And we released a couple of titles in by about 96, 97, which did okay. But didn't exactly set the world on fire, but did okay. They were good. We liked them. We thoroughly enjoyed working on them. And then by the early 2000s, back then you had two big comic book distributors, and they merged together, and one of them paid pennies on the dollar for the money they still owed you, and that was enough to see the end of us, unfortunately. But during that time, well, as we kind of faded out, as that was happening, we did quite a lot of design work. And this is going back for the artists out there. I was using Photoshop when Photoshop was young enough that it had one level of undo and no layers in it, which is a horrifying idea now if you try to speak to any artists now about that. But I was coloring comic books using that. And I was also an inker. So I used to ink with pen and ink, with brush and ink as well. And it was early enough that you would photograph them and then overlay acetate and overlay lettering on top, hand done, and then photograph that and put that into the book. That's how they were made. So not an awful lot of computer work until the back end when Photoshop actually started to do something. And so we did some design work there. In our building, there was an ad agency called Camel, who did a lot of the advertising for Core and a couple of the other game studios. One of them did Tomb Raider. So one of the more interesting bits of work we used to do was draw out poses for advertising hoardings for Lara Croft, because doing a render took a long time. So we would draw the poses, send them out, and then they choose which pose they want, and then they would then ask them to pose the model in that, and then a week later the render would come back that they would print for their advertising hoardings. And we did a couple of those, and one of them, the guy was Max Rayner was the artist, and he's still around. He's in the DC stable. He's now drawing Batman and the rest. He did one pose that I really liked, and I think it made the end of the film, the Lara Croft film. She holds up two guns at an awkward angle, and that was one of our poses. So I'm a little bit proud of that one. Oh, to be fair, it's Nigel's pose. I mean Max's pose, not mine. And we also had Designers Republic underneath us as well below. So Designers Republic were the design team that did the work for the first Wipeout, and for the older people on the PS1. When the first Wipeout came out, it had an incredible design style to it. It had this fusion of Western and Japanese iconography, and it was spectacular. It was well ahead of its time, and it gave it such a cool feel. That was done by the Designers Republic, who were just below us. So we had a little kind of artistic community around there. During that time, I occasionally did a bit more behavior analysis work as it kind of wound down. We had a nice little run up to the year 2000 where everybody was spending lots and lots of money, and then the year 2000 passed and nobody spent any money anymore. So that quickly cut off. And at that point, we went off, and Nigel carried on doing his penciling work and his comic work. I did more consultancy work, more behavior analysis work, because that was kind of bringing in money, and I enjoyed it. And then from there, I decided I can either dive into consultancy full time, or I can actually have a go at games, which is what I really wanted to do. So I gave it one last go at games. So I went down to London and traded in Maya for 3 months, and then came back, worked on my portfolio endlessly, as everybody does, because your portfolio is never ready. And then I did a bit of work, kind of as an outsourcer, working back at the studio that trained me. They set up a temporary studio that did buildings for New York Tycoon. And so we had so they're all ex-students, and we all got back together again. And for, again, 2 or 3 months, we did these. We created these buildings for New York Tycoon. And then after that, I applied to Sumo. And Sumo, looking back, was my first ever interview and my first ever job application. And they accepted me in there, partly because they liked a lot of the work that we did on flyers for Sheffield. We did a lot of the flyer work, and they liked that. They recognised it. They went, "Oh, this is cool. I like this. I remember this." And I think that just kind of got them to bypass the unfinished state of my portfolio. And I joined Sumo in 2006, and from there we did first work I did with Driver 76, which ironically had me doing comic books again, because the cutscenes were all done as a comic book style, but in the 1970s. Printed style like that, which was great. And then moved on within that project, just doing a huge amount of optimization as we tried to cram New York City into a PSP. And then Sumo, I stayed on Sumo's journey, and they just grew. They got a great reputation as a safe pair of hands. We did some fantastic cross-platform work, really close relationship with Sega. And we did, I think, to do All-Stars Tennis, Sega All-Stars Tennis, then on to do Sega All-Stars Racing. And it was with Sega All-Stars Racing, I was an environment artist on that, that we first started to get my taste of external development, which was a field I'd move into permanently. We worked with a studio, a new studio back then called Lemon Sky, based in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So we worked with them, and I worked on and off with them light touch as an environment artist. And then they set up in 2007 or 2008. They set up an India studio. Sumo itself set up a studio in India, an art studio in India, in Pune. And it was a bit of a rough reception. So this is back when external development, or absolutely outsourcing back then, was brand new. And there was a lot of uncertainty within the studio about how, especially when the artist, how long before I'm out of a job? This is a cheaper. And the senior management, the leadership team, had never seen it as a job threat. They'd seen it as a supplement, seen it as a support. So I was quite enthusiastic about it, to be honest. And they said, when they made the announcement, if anyone wants to go out to India, you can do. And so I put my name down. And a few months later, I had my review with Darren Mills, who was one of the founders, directors. He's the art director there. And he asked in my review if I wanted to go out to India for 6 months. And the reason was the India studio was struggling. They were struggling to deliver quality. They're struggling to deliver on time. The relationship with a home studio was difficult. It obviously started off from a hard point. And the idea was that to improve their quality, I'd go out there as an artist, and I'd sit with them and work with them, and we would they would learn from me, and we'd learn from each other, and we'd improve. I said 6 months was too long, but I'll go out for 3 months if you fly my then girlfriend and now wife out for a week in the middle, which they agreed to. So the first time I went out to India, I went out for 3 months, lived out there for 3 months. And that was really where my love of external development and my passion for it came from. Because it was the biggest challenge of my career by a long way, and probably still remains the biggest challenge of my career. The biggest challenge I've had to overcome was getting the India studio back on track. And it's a very long story. So the 3 months is a long story, which I won't go into fully. But on a very base level, one of the obvious questions is, why is India not working well? And the standard response I got from the artists was, well, they're crap and they don't work very hard. And I went over there and I found that they were brilliant and they worked incredibly hard. It had nothing to do with their artistic skill, which is a good job because I'm a kind of middling artist. Like, I did not set the world on fire. I was decent, and I would have stayed in my decent lane probably my whole career. But what I found there was actually, it was all the things that I'd learned in the behavior analysis and the consultancy work that I'd done in other industries that really came to help. It was all around communication. It was all around structure and the kind of work and the way they were asking for work. And the studio culture itself over there, it was to do with that. That's where the stumbling blocks were. And so I worked with them for 3 months out there, and I learned to love India. I think India is a very hard place to go to, especially if you're going there for 3 months. I've traveled a lot around the world, and it's still the biggest culture shock of any country I've been to. And by the time I came back, I was very ready to come back. It had been a hard amount of work. It had been a trying time. It had been incredibly rewarding because of what we'd done. We did manage to turn the studio around. The studio grew significantly while we were there. We moved into new offices, but India itself is exhausting. It's poverty and wealth next to each other. It'll make you cry and make you laugh 15 times a day, straight after each other. It is back to back. It's an exhausting place. And when I came back, I was very, very ready to come back. But it's funny. After about 3 or 4 months of being back in the UK, there was part of me that was going, I wonder when I get to go back out to India again.
Right. Yeah.
It gets under your skin. Yeah. The people, the place, it's so different, and it's so terrible and so wonderful. And yeah, it had gotten right underneath my skin. And we found over the next few months, I went back to work on, I think we were then working on All Stars Transformed, but I think it's probably my favorite project to have worked on. Sega Racing All Transformed was fantastic. We were working there with the EP for that was Craig Duncan, who's now the studio head at Rare. And the producer under him is Joe Neat, who heads up the Sea of Thieves project at Rare as well now. And Steve Lysette, who was basically a sumo and Sega legend. And it was a fantastic project to work on, but Sumo India was struggling again. And so this time they asked if I would. They created a new role, which was a brand new title then called Outsourced Manager, which was a new title to the industry, really. And they asked if I would apply for that job, and I applied for it, and I was given the job about a month later, and that's where I took on the role of Outsourced Manager so this was about 2008, I think, or late 2008. And yeah, I went out to help them. I went out to help Lemon Sky. I was given 6 weeks, to get my feet under the table. And within the first week, I was sent out to Malaysia to help Lemon Sky, who was struggling with the levels that they were on. And again, they did a fantastic job in turning things around. And then I went on from that we grew. We expanded the amount of external development we did at the studio. We expanded the Pune, India studio. The relationship improved. And after, I think I was there at Sumer in total about 8 years. I was outsourced manager for 6 of those. And that's when Xbox approached me if I would come and help join their central team, looking after external development, supporting the external development teams for EMEA, for the European studios, which then was Lionhead and Rare and Press Play, and some other projects they had bubbling under around there, with a team based out of Seattle. So I joined. And shortly after I joined the central media team they're all part of, completely disbanded. And our group went from 9 people to 3 people. And then 6 months after that, went down to 2 people, which was me and Esteban Laura. He handled the middleware side of the external tech side, and I handled the supplier side. So I got to look after support teams globally. Not because I was fantastic, but kind of by default. Everybody else left. And we were 6 studios then with 10 and 343 and the rest. So my role there was to understand the ecosystem of external development, to onboard suppliers, fold them into Microsoft, deal with the Microsoft machine, help our teams talk and guide each other in how we do external development, and to educate some of the LT on what we do and fight our corner. And so, yeah, our group remained me and Esteban and Jeff McCrory, who was a part of the original group, but then was made a vendor. And he's now full time. And we bounced around Microsoft, and we bounced around the world, me and Esteban, for many years, and got to meet the incredible teams. So the wonderful thing about Xbox and Microsoft is that it opens doors, and you get to see so much and learn so much. And that's what I did. I've learned a huge amount of the teams that we've worked with, the fantastic external development managers we've got. And the art teams and the production teams we have. And so I've been supporting them now. We were 6 studios and we're now 25. And probably as of last week, I think we're nearing 40 as of the ABK acquisition. Yep. So yeah, I started looking after 3 and now support a whole bunch more. But it's being very generous to myself to say that I do, because the way that we operate slightly differently, and I'm a service. So some studios I work with very closely, other studios I light touch, some studios I don't work with at all. It all depends on how they're integrated and how we work together. But that's how and then the founding of, and then XDS, the External Development Summit, coming along and joining the advisory board and joining the peers and our community and building the external development community. But that's where I've learned to love external development. That's where I learned, like I say, I was a very average artist. So that's where I learned that my talent isn't particularly in that. My talent is in getting people who are much more talented than I am to work well with other people who are much more talented than I am. And I enjoy seeing them and I enjoy their work. And that's kind of where I found that eventually in the game world I fit in.
Yeah. It's a familiar story. I mean, it's similar for me as well. There is a real joy when you get to a point where you actually see somebody else doing what you do, but to a whole new level, and you can give them ideas, or you can give guidance, and then you see that come back, and it's like, oh, wow, I would never have thought of that. Or, but it's a familiar story of artist who also has had some kind of experience or education in a more kind of, I guess, business, environment or management, and then sort of marrying those two skills. And it's a really kind of interesting journey, and I definitely want to touch on XDS and your position in the advisory board there, because it's such an interesting part of the industry, external development. It's anyone who you speak to who's involved in that side of things is so passionate about it, and just the fact that there is a wonderful conference dedicated to it speaks volumes in itself. Was there a particular kind of leap going from Sumo, who are obviously massive at the moment, but I guess at the time that you left them, going from their studio to Xbox, was that quite a a shock to the system in terms of the size and the scale and the scope of what the job involved?
Yes, it kind of is. It was best. Funny enough, my final interview for my position at Xbox, the his name was Dan. I'm trying to remember the rest. Oh no, Ben Camerano, who's now at Blizzard, was the head of creative media before it was disbanded. He was my final interview. So Xbox approached me for the job, but I still went through 9 interviews, and he was the last of them. And it was interesting because I said to him, "Look, I love sumo, and I really enjoy working here. Why should I work for Xbox?" And his answer is probably the answer that you're looking for, which was, well, at Sumo, you get to affect how a game is made. If you come to Xbox, you get to affect how the games industry is made. And the size of the challenge kind of like, yeah, that's just, it's different. It is on a different scale. But like a lot of things that are at scale, it's for the most part, outside of the huge volumes of admin and internal machines that you've got to deal with, for the most part, it is scale is the only difference. The problems and what you're dealing with is exactly the same, just bigger. It's just the numbers are bigger, but the problems are the same, whether they're around communication, whether they're around about how you integrate and how you work with it, whether around potential, whether around people and cultures and all the rest. They are all exactly the same problems that I would have had as an outsource manager at Sumo. Just the scale had changed.
Yeah. And why would you say, with the with the position of external development and outsourcing, it seems to have much more focus in the games industry, versus, I mean, we do a lot of stuff in animation, for example, and obviously there's a lot of outsourcing that goes on there, but there's less kind of focus on it, I guess. Why why is external development so important, so crucial, to the studios that you work with, for example? What's so special about it?
Well, I mean, on a very base level, so you look at it now, at a very base level, games don't get made without external development. Just doesn't happen. You have to get down to kind of proper indie levels before you start finding games that are completely untouched by external development. When you get up to the AAA, AA and AAA, the size of external development teams is usually bigger than the internal development team, and that's if you discount QA and Loc, which are vital parts, obviously, of the external development process, but they go by volume. So even if you take that volume off, the scale is bigger than the development teams themselves. I think I don't know enough about the animation world to understand why there is a dead difference there. My suspicion is it may be down to nothing more than acknowledgement. We have moved away from the term outsourcing, but that's still really what it is. It's still, if you in any other industry, it would still be determined that called that way. And it still quite often is called that here. But outsourcing has connotations. And it's not that. It's not throw it over the wall. It is not just cheap labor. That's not what we're doing here. It's a vital, vital part of how we make games. And the shift away from there are companies that don't acknowledge that they work with external studios. And that's less true now, but it's certainly been true in the past. There are certainly projects who won't acknowledge all the people from external studios by name who worked on their project, which they absolutely should do. There is still a feeling it's a necessity. Okay, and this is where we are at the moment. I think we need external development, and the fundamental reason why we need external development is we can't hire. We don't have those skills internally. We can't scale to that. So, given unlimited money, you still can't hire enough artists to do your job. Given unlimited money and space, you still can't bring in the expertise that you want. You still can't find the exact right people that you want. And so basically you can't do it. You can't do it that way. There's money to be saved. There is, because you're not dealing with HR, you're not dealing with all the on-site costs that come with hiring an employee. but also you're doing something that is necessary to protect your studio as well. And this is something I think probably the smaller studios, the smaller studios can really benefit from when it comes to external development. We've had a horrendous year, right? So this has been a terrible year for employment inside the games industry as we snap back from COVID. But if you look at the chart, the curve, the curve of revenue is still kind of tracking to the same level it always did. The industry itself has not massively shrunk in general terms. It just has this abnormal spike. And what external teams do that's so vital for the studios is that they are built to expand and shrink. A development studio has a single revenue source, or maybe two projects on the go, 2 or 3 projects on the go. An external development studio has multiple revenue sources. So they can shrink and expand. So instead of your studio hiring and laying off, or instead of your studio hiring in huge amounts of contractors and laying off, instead of your studio trying to manage all those networks, what you're doing is you're bringing in these external development teams that are able to marry with your studio. And I think, funnily enough, one of the differentiators between animation and film and external development and games is sheer duration. It takes years. So our external development partners that we work with are working with us for years and years on the same project. Sometimes, like if you look at Turn 10, you look at the Forza franchise, they have been working with Glass Egg for 17 years, I think. Maybe longer, it may even be pushing 20. And they are absolutely vital to how they work. And so these relationships are really, really long term. And I think in the animation industry, they kind of come and go. So you may well return to the same ones, but the project itself comes and goes within a 6-month, 8-month, or a year-long period. And it's less so for games. So we are much closer tied to who we work with. And the statistics show that the actual churn of external development suppliers when we pick new ones, it doesn't happen at the beginning of every project. We don't jump to other suppliers. We're not constantly looking within. It's actually, we tend to stay with the same suppliers, but so long as the relationship is held.
And in terms of finding that relationship, what's important? What are the kind of key things for, an external service provider to consider in terms of going through due diligence or just generally, having their service down? What are the kind of key considerations that external development partners should be thinking about?
Well, the insights report released by XDS gives you pretty good insight into what those. But if you look at the top 5, so cost is in there, usually hovering around number 3. It's in the top 5. I don't think it's ever been the top 1, oddly enough. Communication and quality are the top 2. If you are a service provider and you're looking to understand what it is that will gain you work, what it is that will put you in a good position. So, yes, one due diligence. In terms of due diligence, it is understanding your security setup, is understanding how your company's made, and how it's structured and it's solid. But honestly, I come at it from a slightly odd angle, right? So if I'm a developer like Turn 10, I'm looking for car and track artists in a realistic style who can do that. But because I sit centrally, because I'm working at a platform level, I'm looking at all the projects and all of what we do. So when a service provider says, what should I be working? What is it you need? I don't know. We do Sea of Thieves, and we do Halo, and we do Starfield, and we do Hi-Fi Rush or whatever. The style difference is just enormous. So it's best, I think, for you not to necessarily look at what the market needs, but there's no harm in it. How we always need, there's always a market for VFX artists and technical artists and the hard to source ones. But in terms of your studio, it's what are you good at? And what do you enjoy? And then the fit can come along from that. So concentrate on what it is that you would like your studio to be. Ask your artist, what's your ideal project? What is it you really want to work at? What do we naturally lean towards? And then the fit can come along out of that. If you try and be all things to everybody, it doesn't quite work. And a lot of the times we say we're looking for external partners, they're looking for that fit. They're looking for that creative fit. And it's not just a creative fit, it's not just a quality fit, it's a communication and a relationship fit because, as we mentioned, it's years. We deal with years of project time. So we want teams we can communicate with. And I have seen teams go through tests. So usually what happens for an art team, so art by volume is the largest amount of external dev that we do, just a sheer volume. When finding external partners, usually the usual practice is I'll put forward some suggestions, for example, and then they'll go through and find the ones they actually want to go to test. And then they'll have between 3 and 5 usually that they'll go and test, and they'll go through a testing process. And those testing processes can be quite short, can be like a week or two. Or on the far end again, there's Forza again, which their car test is just monstrous. It's the hardest art test I know in gaming. It's incredibly difficult. But during that test, you will test not just the quality of the work and the turnaround, but you'll test the communication and the relationship. And I would advise studios who are testing to really look at how they want to test, because studios test in very different ways. There are studios that will test and they'll develop the perfect brief. Like, we'll give them the studio the best chance they possibly have of delivering quality to us. But then on the other side, there is what's it like in production? How often am I actually going to create that shiny pearl of a brief again? How often is it going to be 2 scribbles and a point to 3 links on Google image search for what you actually want coming back, right? So do you test like that? You say, look, I know it's going to be messy and we're not expecting perfection, but this is probably closer to what you're going to get. And so I advise you is to pick whereabouts in that scale they kind of are. But there are certainly studios that have not selected the highest quality delivery from a test because they've worked with other studios in that test have come back and said, you know what, they're not as good as so-and-so. The results aren't as good as so-and-so, but I like working with them. And I trust I can communicate with them. I trust they'll raise problems when they're there. They'll feel comfortable to ask the right questions and be honest. And I can get them to that standard of quality. I can get them there. Because at this point, in this level of maturity industry, you should be able to deliver. You should be able to deliver to quality. So the focus on relationship, communication, production management, and trust, those kind of things becomes more important as the expectation of you should be able to make this starts to become standard.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we even see that at supplier level in terms of contractors that we bring on. It's amazing how often it defaults to just a simple: are they going to fit in with our team? Are they going to fit into the culture? Are they just nice to have around? Are they fun to have around? And then it's a question of where does their work compare? And and you can totally get them up to that point. But makes perfect sense. I'm going to ask you about the movie method.
Okay, right. Yeah.
That you did a great talk at XDS, and then more recently it's been kind of repurposed on the XDS podcast, which I listened to a couple of months ago, and I just found it really, really fascinating. And so for our audience who maybe who are maybe not familiar with this particular presentation, I would love to kind of dive into that again and just kind of, ask you to kind of talk us through this concept of making games with the movie method and your kind of research into that and kind of where your thoughts are on it just now.
So I've looked at the movie method during lockdown because I think we've been fascinated with it as an industry for a long time. And I think we have an impression of what the movie method is but there's a difference to what it actually is. So my suspicion is that when we talk about movie method, we talk about having a small core team, at a base level, a small core team that drives a large creative production. And I think the way we see it in games is that is a small core team and a hell of a lot of external development. So really it's about how do we manage that volume of external development? And that's how I think we pitch. That's how we see the movie method. But I don't think that's the movie method. And when I was looking into it, that's what the movie method really is it's a different way of creating sections of production. And the two fundamental differences between games development and movie development is that games development is a ongoing run of interlocking interdependencies. So art depends on code, code depends on art, design depends on art and code. They all drive the three big ones all drive each other, and they all affect each other. So you make a design decision, it ripples out for code and it ripples out for art. You make an art change, it ripples out into design, it ripples out into code. And because they're all interlocked, the difficult thing is that they ripple forward, as you would expect, in time. I mean, these all change, we now move in this direction, we now have to do this, but they ripple backwards as well. Work we have already done has to be redone. If we are now changing the rigs, if we are now changing a design direction, levels that we've completed are now obsolete. It ripples backwards and forward, and that's what makes it so difficult for production. So that's what we have large production teams. We have dedicated production teams to each facet, to just try and keep control and predict and become this, and understand where it's going to go and keep pushing it on there and understand how it affects the past and understanding how it affects the future. And that's why games never finished. I mean, we are patching games years later. They're still never quite finished. Even forgetting the live service games, forgetting the long tail games and DLC, the game itself is rarely properly finished. Because we have these interlocking interdependencies, and they have a real strength to them. They have a real strength because it means that these groups work very, very close to each other. It means that there is a real power in that, a creative and a technological power in that. And we tend to be dealing with finite technological resources. We are dealing with a console cycle, so a console engine, for example, the console kit that is not going to improve over 7 years. You're going to be dealing with that. We're trying to get more out of it. So we're constantly working on that, and we're constantly striving and pushing the edges of what we can do and advancing our industry. And the way that we work like that really helps in that. The other side effect is that we iterate in production. So we iterate a lot in production. As we're building it, we are iterating. So that's our kind of standard, and I am simplifying horrendously, and there's reason for everybody on the movie side and the films and the game side to call me up on any number of things that I say here, and the chances are they are right. But going back then to the movie method, the difference between the movie method is that it's all about the shoot. So what they're doing in the movie in pre-production there is they are de-risking the shoot, because once you start to do the shoot, it's on rails. The actors are in there, they're doing it, it's done, the sets are done. It is just going to go ahead, and it's going to keep going until it's done. So everything has to be booked in. The cameras have to book in, the sets have to book in, the whole thing has to be set. So you are de-risking that. So as much as you possibly can, everything is locked in. And then you set it going, and then at the end you have the post-production where you go back and you start doing your editing and your cutting and the rest. So what we don't do in games is we're not on rails. We are interlocked and we keep going. So if they are interlocking stacks, the movie is them stacked just one on top of each other, and there's so little written about how to be a producer in games. This is one of the things I found. There's so little written about how to make games. How to make movies. There's so little written about it. I found like the kind of books that you get from universities was the kind of stuff I found. But there was one article written in the 70s, and they explained it extremely well. And I think the lesson to take from it, which is the model that they use, is what's called a closed temporary system. So somebody comes in, does their job, and goes. So once they're done, and that's it, then they're done. And then it moves on to the next one. With us, somebody comes in, does their job, and keeps doing it alongside everybody else right to the very, very end, and gets called back. And so what this system does, in order to make that work, you have to be able to be very, very prepared. So pre-production is longer. Pre-production in movies is 6 or 7 times the length of the shoot. Like so for us, pre-production is a shorter period, and production is a really, really long period, and then there's post. So we would need to have a longer pre-production, and you would then lock down exactly everything that you're doing. So you set art going, you set design going into the production period, and it's There's not much room for iteration in production. In fact, what you're trying to avoid is iteration in production. Now, don't get me wrong. There's around the edges. You can always iterate. There's always a sliding scale of things that aren't going to interfere fundamentally with it. But your basics and everything you're going to do are locked before you start a game production if you're going to use the movie method properly. And that's really hard for us to do. That's really difficult as a mindset for us to do because we see things evolving in front of us. So we want that information. We want our leaders want that kind of information coming back. I mean, we want to go down avenues and explore what we do. But this doesn't allow you to do that. It also doesn't allow you to evolve technology because one of the advantages that movies have is a camera's set. Like, it's set. It's just a thing. And it does its thing and it goes. The audio's set. The world you're in is kind of set. Even special effects have been around since they painted a moon on a background, It's not, the actual fundamentals haven't really changed that much. So you're dealing with really set technology. And we don't like doing that. We like pushing boundaries, especially in AAA. In order for a movie method to work, you have to draw a line under the technology. And that's really difficult for us to do. It kind of goes against what we want to do. But when you draw a line under technology, what you do is I think you kind of free up the creative.
Yeah.
Because we're not looking for a technological solution to a creative problem anymore. We're looking just solely at lighting. So it means what it allows you to do is focus on your discipline and only your discipline. So what I'm talking about, it has ripples backwards and ripple forward. Well, when you use a movie method, what you're doing is you're taking away the ripple back and the ripple forward, and you say, what matters right now? What are you doing right now? And it allows you to focus on that. And that's quite powerful. That means that all you have to worry about is what's in front of you. And that's where I think the movie method is really interesting. That's where I think allowing you to have that focus. And then, so what I found looking into it further is that, it means that you can create too much. That's okay. We overshoot film. We shoot from angles we'll never use. We have scenes that will get cut. What we tend to do is because we iterate, people get exhausted rewriting. And I was talking to a narrative design company about this, and she was saying that, look, it's the rewrites that are exhausting. Doing a scene and then it being cut's not so bad because then you do a different scene. But just constantly going over and redoing this one and that's the one that wears you out. That's the one that is soul destroying to you. And so I think if we use that method, then it's okay to create too many levels. It's okay to create too much content and actually bake that into your production schedule, knowing that we could well cut them away. Because the movies, they polish by refinement. They polish by removing the unnecessary, polishing what they have. They until they have a shining pin of a production, till the filler is kind of gone. We polish by addition. In games, we add more when we polish. So we will add more tech. We will add more animations. We will add more characters. We will add better shaders. We will whatever. We add when we polish, and that's what we use our polish phase for. Those are two big fundamental differences in how we do it. So we can also reduce our post-production time as a result of that as well. So these, I think, are the fundamentals. But it obviously can't work for every project. There are certain types of games it can work for. There are games that it can't work for. The other part of that is that movie productions, their core team, because they work this way with external development, they come together and they disperse. When we build studios to last. We don't build studios to die. And this is a thing that we have to accept if we want to go down this route, is that we will build something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's okay. But we, as an industry, we can't accept that way of working right now. Or we certainly struggle. We're not set up to do it. And that's partly why the movie industry is so good at spotting the right talent to fill in the right gaps, to understand where they go. And it's through that method that they're allowed to be able to maintain those small teams at the top, because those small teams at the top are focusing on what's in front of them, not what's ahead of them, what's behind them, and the disastrous consequences you could have for making a tiny change in a game.
Yeah, because it sounds like, to test run this sort of method, you would almost need a new company that could even be, an entertainment company. So yeah, we could do film, we can do TV, we can do games, we can do comics, books, and literally have that sort of leadership team who are just exec producers, showrunners, that type of thing. And it is it's like this game is going to be a project. The next project we do might not be a game, and we're just going to go out and we're going to piece together those sort of key talent, key teams around that. Is there? uh, Do you think it's a case of it's not done that way traditionally, just because that's the way it's always been done in games, or is there? Do you see an opportunity where the games industry could look at saying we're just going to draw a line under, we're going to use the tech that we have right now, and we're going to limit ourselves to a certain amount to focus on the creative. I always remember this. I had a friend a few years ago who, I was having a coffee with him, and he said he was a composer, and he said, I'm going to do a track, but I'm going to make the whole track just using an upright acoustic piano. So I'm going to, I'm going to do everything on that percussion, bass, melodies, pads, everything, just by using this piece of wood and processing it to an inch of its life and all this. And I always thought that was really interesting because he was saying, I'm just going to limit myself to this one thing and see how far I can take it. So yeah, I guess the question there is it simply a case of we've just never done it that way? Or
I think partly, yes. I think partly we are a constantly evolving industry, so it's hard for us to want to do it that way. We see it in the independent, in the indie scene. We see this because they are by default limited, and that's why you see the creativity pushed so much further in the independent games market. And it's I talk about this movie method about the production and the rest, and maybe limiting the technology side, but they do it all the time. They work with limitations, and the fact of the matter is that the creative process is nothing but working within limitations. That's all we do. Every creative process has a limitation. It can be a budget, it can be time, it can be access to skill set, access to equipment, whatever. Everything has a limitation. Even if you have a blank sheet of paper and you start writing a book, you have a limitation because you set those limitations yourself. This is this character. This is how he would react. This is this world that they're in. You gradually set those limitations, and out of it comes a creative product. We just have to be a bit more open and vicious about our limitations. Like the example I tend to give is that one of the scariest things you can see in the theater is The Woman in Black. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I have, yeah,
Right?
brilliant.
Yeah. So The Woman in Black is what? One closed basket, two men, some sound effects, and a few shadows.
Yeah.
That's it, really. And it's terrifying. So if you can terrify somebody with those kind of limitations, then you don't have an excuse for not terrifying somebody inside Unreal. Or finding, you think of the axes, you think what we already have. You don't have an excuse for doing that. There is a way to do it. And I think when you remove the desire, the real need to advance the tech and do something new with the tech and advance that and just focus on the creative, I think you will unlock some doors. And I think you will take a little bit of weight off what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could probably chat about this, all day. But as I say, if anyone listening to this, there's more kind of information, available kind of through XDS and the podcast. I definitely, urge everybody to go and check that out. Which kind of brings us on to XDS. You're obviously a member of the advisory board for that event. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came around, and what does XDS mean to you and in your industry? And I'm conscious as well that there will be people listening to this show who are moving into the game space, particularly animators and animation studios, and so I think it's worth kind of highlighting XDS as an event itself.
Yeah, I mean, XDS is super interesting. So XDS for me, I first went to when I was an outsourced manager at Sumo, and it was the first time there was ever this kind of event. Um, and honestly, it was like getting a big hug because for the first time, I met I met people who were going through the same thing I was going through. Because if you're an external dev manager or an outsource manager, it's a fairly lonely profession, right? You sit in the middle and you spend most of your time annoying people internally and annoying people externally. Right. So yeah, like the very best outsource managers or external dev managers I know are very well organized diplomats. Right.
Yeah.
So you sit in this kind of you're quite often across multiple projects or multiple teams, so you're no real fully part of one. You touch upon many of them, so you sit in this quite a lonely position, especially early on when there wasn't this event. You forged your own way. You just kind of worked it out as you were going along. So the first time I went to the event, it was, oh, you suffer the same problem I do. I recognize that problem, and you find it hard too. It's not like I've been doing it wrong all this time. Everybody finds this a bit difficult. Everybody, and finding that with the suppliers as well, and getting to understand the suppliers better and that world. It was so important. Honestly, you couldn't wipe the smile off my face the first time I went there because it was just I was just surrounded. Because this was an industry I really loved, but it was a really early days of the industry. So to find like-minded people there, and credit has to go to EA and to Jason Harris and to Chris Wren and the teams at first. I think Grayson Chalmers as well was one of the first people that came up with this idea for bringing it into existence because EA didn't need to do it. They took the rising tide raises all ships approach and just brought in everybody to it. And they were so like you didn't see an EA banner at this event. It didn't promote or push EA at all. They just provided enough funds for it to break even. But then under Chris's just sheer energy, I think, and sheer force of will, it became an incredibly professional event. They drove it into becoming incredibly focused, and it helped us to learn from each other. And those first days were really basic, like how do you communicate? What are the tools you use? What are the problems you've hit? And from that, we have seen it evolve and grow. So I think it was 300 or 400 in the first event. It's now 800 plus as an event, and it could be a lot bigger. And the industry has advanced, and I would say that the industry has advanced 10 times faster because of that event, because of the sharing that has gone on, because there is now a community of suppliers and managers and developers that know each other and understand each other and go through the same problems and evolve and learn from each other. And the industry has had to evolve that fast as well, because the games industry has, and it's had to pull alongside, and it has done that without much love. Outside of the industry, we're not. It's not recognized in the same way as an industry as a developer. It's not put alongside in the same way. Um, and I think within the community, I think that's why people are passionate within the community, because you have to be a certain kind of person to be into it. But also, once you're there, you realize the talent. We were talking about people more talented than us. There's so much talent, and it's so diverse. It's so global. And that XES really managed to push that. And the advisory board was a good part of that. And out of that came Ignite, which was a developer-only conference where the developers could talk to each other, and the Insights report. And so we have seen XDS grow and develop. But it also it's getting to a point now where it's highlighting some of the problems that we face as an industry. I would always advise anyone to go to XDS. I advise anyone to get there to go onto the site and look at the materials. But now, as we are pushing forward, as the industry has evolved and got larger, and external development has become the way we make games, I think it's Dave Sanderson at the last XDS said, this is now how we make games. It has highlighted how little support there is. So I think it's Keywords. One of their reports estimate the external development industry to be worth about 13 billion a year. So the gaming industry is worth 200 billion. The music industry, which I think is global, or it may just be US only, but to give that some perspective, the music industry is worth 21 billion. Now, if you think of the amount of conferences, independent bodies, support structures, communities, what have you, that are in industries that are in the music industry or in many of the other industries that are worth far less than external development is. If you think the games don't get made without it, 1 2.5 day conference a year seems very light to me.
Yeah.
Okay, it seems very light to me. No independent body. The XCS is the closest we have to an independent body, just by default. The event this year sold out in 30 minutes on the supplier side, and it sold out on the buyer side as well. So when an event, and which is a tragedy, really, because those most think about all our suppliers in Asia and all around the world who woke up to find out that the tickets were gone. I never stood a chance. In fact, if you weren't at your desk within a half-hour window, getting a ticket was extremely hard, and it shouldn't be. Yeah, that's you. Well, yeah, there you go. You understand the pain, right?
Yeah.
You understand the pain. So it is. It's that. It's. But what it does for me, what I'm really seeing now, is it highlights how precarious a situation the support structure around external development is, and it may be a byproduct of that lack of focus, that lack of visibility, that lack of advocacy for the industry. Is the body there's not a body standing up going, "This is brilliant. What they're doing is amazing." It's not just about the developers, it's about the whole everybody who contributed to that, and the artists and the animators and the coders and the UX and the UI and the narrative design and mocap and everything else that goes in, all the audio and the wonderful efforts that go in. We haven't got a body that stands up and shouts about it. It shouts about it inside a very contained arena that's 2.5 days long. And also, finally on that point, is that if you look at there are so many studios that get most of their work, or a very large percentage of their work, from XDS. So if they don't get to go, they can lose. There's 30 or 40% of their work sometimes that they don't get, or they don't get leads they would never see. That's a very, very delicate pillar to have a $13 billion industry perched on top of. There aren't very many marketing opportunities out there. It isn't the same way that you can't putting adverts in magazines doesn't really have that big an effect. So I think what's happened to XDS is that it is starting now to highlight through how fast it sells out, how focused it is, how much work teams get, that we don't have enough support inside the external development community for an industry of our size. And it's something I think that we need to rectify. We need to advocate for. We need to push on. And now the independence of XDS, as EA have withdrawn the funding, and Chris and the team have taken it independent. Oddly enough, it's the best shot we have at forming that body, and it shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't really be the case. But it's just the way that it's fallen. So I'm excited for what happens for XDS independently, and the opportunities it affords if we decide to take them, if we find a way to go down that route. But yeah, so it's a wonderful event now. Big support, huge fan of Chris and the rest. They do an incredible job, and the team at Brand Live who put it on just work miracles every year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that insight. It really is a useful, well, such a key event. I've only ever been once. I think we do have a business development rep who's in the States who kind of goes for us, and then obviously, well, went virtually with COVID and stuff like that. So hopefully be a bit quicker off the mark next year. And
I think it has to grow one way or another. Yeah. I mean, there's a big demand for an XDS Europe, I think, and adding extra dates to a calendar, and there are avenues to explore. But I think at a base level, it's a bigger event than we can. The problem is you extend it in time, because God, you're exhausted by the end of the 2.5 days.
Yeah.
But the event, they're limited by location size at the moment as well. So but that can change. And so it'll be interesting to see what the evolution is now that the shackles are off, and they can evolve.
Watch this space. This has been great, Sam. I really appreciate your time today. We're going to finish up with a new closing question, which is kind of centered around, everything that we do, on the Big Mouth Audio side is all about, it's driven by storytelling. We see ourselves as a storytelling company primarily. I'm curious to know what particular experiences, memories, um, have stuck with you or have left a lasting impact on you from a particular story, from an area of storytelling. Is there anything that kind of springs to mind that, great storytelling that's left an impact with yourself?
There's one, but my favorite story in games, which I like so much that I actually consider I figured it's just an urban myth. But this year at Develop, I can't remember who it was, but it's somebody who works in the Scottish games industry or worked heavily in the Scottish industry was able to answer this question. I said, look, this is my favorite story in games. But I think it's an urban myth. And I told him and he said, no, it's true. So I can tell the story with a bit of confidence, unless he's also stringing me along as well. But so it always interests me that there is a game development hub in Dundee. And that's odd that there is a game development hub that far north, right? In a port town in Scotland. It seems very strange. And it has been a game development hub for forever, right? For as long as it. And I was told that the reason for this, and if you think of what it's produced as well, I said, so for the reason for this is that back in the days of Sinclair Spectrum, the Spectrum 28K or 48K was the factory was in Scotland, and one year, a truckload of Spectrum 48Ks was stolen, and the Spectrums were handed out for next to nothing on the streets of northern Scotland, particularly Dundee. And those, just remember, no YouTube, no instruction manuals, no nothing, but just the act of having those kits out in that area, the kids started to play with them, started to learn them, started to make their own simple, basic games. Back when they were bedroom coders, and those bedroom coders gradually came together, and the games got a bit bigger, and now we find ourselves, out of that came DMA, and out of DMA came Rockstar, and out of Rockstar came Grand Theft Auto 3, and all the rest of the Grand Theft Autos. So out of somebody handing out Spectrum Sinclairs cheaply on the streets of Dundee, the single biggest entertainment product ever created in GTA 5 was born 20 years later, 30th. And that I find amazing. And that's my favorite. So apparently it is true. And I think the lesson from that is just don't underestimate what a spark can give you. What, just that bit of faith. If you had said to somebody, we need to build a technology hub, right? If you said, we need to build a technology that's going to work on cutting edge technology that's just being born, the home computer just being born, nobody would have said, let's go to Dundee in the early 1980s.
Yeah.
Like, nobody said, that's the place. That's where you would do it. But opportunity drives that. And yeah, I think it's a wonderful story, and I continue to hope that it is true.
That's so interesting. I've always wondered that myself, obviously being Scottish. Why Dundee? Why Dundee?
Why Dundee?
But there you go. Well, I'm going to the Scottish Games Week next week, so that'll be my my mission.
Check it out for me.
Yeah. I'll ask around.
Even if it's not true, I'm telling the story anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, listen, Sam, thanks so much for your time today and sharing all your insight and experiences. It's been a real pleasure to chat to you, and I know that our audience will get lots of value from this conversation. And yeah,
so. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great. It's been a lovely way to spend a morning. Thank you so much.
And I hope your voice isn't too.
It'll be okay. I don't think I need it until later this afternoon. I can rest up, I'm sure.
Excellent. Well, listen, thanks so much, and hopefully we'll see you out there next year in Vancouver.
So take care.
Awesome. Cheers, Sam. Bye.